Okay, hello. So, another one, another live stream, but just watching spooky videos. Let's see, online. Okay. Okay, so, don't remember if we watched this. Oh, man. Okay, we've watched it. Okay, well, I'll just get this out. No, what? You can be fucking kidding me. No, what? What is it doing? It's fucking stupid ass. Why will it fucking do that? 1 second. Oh, gosh, fucking stupid computer will do this shit. Of course. Exactly. Swear to God, if it does this again. God.
During hunting season, at least once a year, I try to travel up to Maine and rent an Airbnb to go hunting. I never bought my own place because I can't really afford it just for a single trip every year. So doing a weekend rental makes more sense for me. Plus, I'm not exactly an expert. I'm still trying to get more experience. Some years I'd go with my uncle, but in recent years, he hasn't been in the best shape health-wise and he's not really up to it anymore. So I've been going alone more recently. Last year, which was 2022 at the time I'm writing this, was the last season that I went hunting. It was November. The Airbnb I rented was near a national park. I arrived late on a Friday because I had to come home from work, get ready, then head out on the road trip. When I pulled up into the long stretch of private dirt road to get to the cabin type Airbnb, it was pitch black outside, and it was dead silent too. This time of year, there's obviously no bugs or crickets left. So the nights are dead silent and dark up there, especially if the place you're staying is secluded like this one. I pulled up as close as I could to the cabin, and the owner told me the key would be hidden under the mat. Sure enough, it was there. I brought my 2 bags inside the cabin and unpacked my things onto the bed in the one bedroom. It was a very cozy cabin, and the owner already had the heat turned up for me, which was nice. Maine gets pretty cold up there in November. There was cable and Wi-Fi in this Airbnb, so I set an alarm to get an early start at dawn, which in my opinion is the best time to find deer or even moose if you're lucky. The next morning, I was up as soon as my alarm went off, and I was out in the woods in less than half an hour. Since this was foreign territory to me, I posted up behind a blowdown I found, some knocked over trees. Usually this would now be a waiting game, but I heard a man's voice call from behind me. I had a mini heart attack and turned around. to see some man with gray hair, but who looked like he was only 50. He was approaching me slowly. He said slowly in a very angry sounding voice, "What the hell are you doing here?" I responded, "Excuse me?" He said, "Hunting is restricted here." I actually was unaware of this. And when I explained this to him, he said, "I watched you ride up here. You best leave the way you came." This scared me. I said, "What do you mean you watched me ride up here?" He told me he always sees people riding up to that cabin, always out of town folk who come up here for the wrong reasons. I apologized to him and told him I'd leave. I grabbed my things and started walking back the way I came. And when I looked behind me, the man was gone, out of sight. I walked back to the cabin, then took my car and drove to a different park that, according to some website, allowed hunting. I posted up there and had a failure of the first half of the day. Around midday, I went back to the cabin to just regroup and have a meal. But when I got back to the cabin, I found that the door was unlocked. I could have sworn I locked it before. When I got inside, I was almost positive certain things had been moved around and the zipper to my bag was unzipped. I couldn't remember if I left it zipped up or not, but it was typical for me to always keep my bag zipped up. I just checked every room quick before settling down. I was way too hungry to just prepare a light meal, so I drove to the little village nearby and picked up some Chinese takeout. Then I drove right back to the cabin. I was planning on heading back
AI can generate tons of copy, but it doesn't know your brand.
out to the park at dusk. When I got back to the cabin, I just ate my food and went straight to take a nap. After my nap, I headed back out to the park. I spent about an hour walking maybe a quarter mile very slowly. I wasn't finding anything. My uncle always told me you could find a deer or moose in 10 minutes or 10 days. It just depends on how many are present and being in the right place at the right time. Sadly, luck was not on my side this day. And so when it was starting to get dark, I packed up and started heading back to my truck. It was just a short drive back to the cabin. I cooked the pasta and meatballs I brought with me for dinner as I had the TV on in the background. Then I laid down on the little love seat couch as I ate and watched some old black and white movie. While sitting there, I thought back to earlier, how the door was unlocked and things appeared to have been moved. Only I didn't notice anything missing. I wondered if it was just in my head or not. Not long after this, I brushed my teeth and shifted to the bedroom where I began to watch another movie in there, planning on falling asleep to it. I was starting to drift into that half-sleep state where what was going on in the movie was actually starting to blend into this half-awake dream I was kind of having, until I heard the distinct sound of a door clicking open that snapped me out of my half-sleep. I groggily looked up and noticed the closet door in the room was now cracked open. This immediately woke me up completely. Now, the door being unlocked and belongings potentially being moved did not seem like a coincidence. I waited a moment, then got out of bed, went to my hunting pack, and grabbed my CZ75. I went back to the bedroom, turned on the light, and pointed my gun at the closet door. I yelled, "Come out now or I'll shoot." A big part of me still didn't believe there could actually be a person in there, and I thought that I was just being overly cautious. But when the door actually pushed open, I was in pure shock. That older man from earlier in the day stepped out, and his unhappy-looking face switched to a gross smile, missing a front tooth. He said, "You got me." I said, "Don't move," as I went to grab my cell phone and call 911. Thank God I had service here. The sheriff's department was on their way, and I let them know I was armed and had the intruder at gunpoint. It was an excruciatingly long wait before the sheriff's deputies arrived.
Let me get
During that
prediction. Overall, by the time they get there, it will switch roles. Like the old man will. Yeah, the old man will point him. But maybe it will, maybe it won't make any sense because, maybe they will recognize the voice. His voice. And stuff.
that time, the man was telling me how he's sick of people like me having no respect for the parks up here. I had no idea what he meant, but I wasn't entertaining him. I kept telling him to shut up. When deputies got there, it was an obvious arrest for breaking and entering and possibly robbery, though I don't think he ever actually stole anything from me. The man claimed the door was simply unlocked, though I don't know if that was true or if he had somehow picked the lock or even climbed through a window. The Airbnb host said that there were no other hidden keys and that I definitely left the door unlocked. He seemed more concerned about whether anything of his was stolen and putting blame on me as opposed to asking me if I was okay and apologizing for the experience. He said he had no idea who the man could have been, even after getting his name. I still don't think I left the door unlocked, but thank God I was on a hunting trip and had my firearms with me to quickly neutralize the threat.
Okay. I'll give it like a 6, 7. Okay, 6 or 7. I'll give it 7. Out of 10. 7.
I was 14 when the story took place. It was my first year hunting deer with my family. To be specific, my father, my cousin, and myself. To paint a picture, my blind was 2 miles south of my father's, with his stand being 9 miles southwest to my camp. We drove a four-wheeler about 100 yards away from his stand, which left me with a while to walk before I even got to mine. I live in northern Michigan, and during the winter, it gets dark quickly and early. It was around 4 p.m. when I started to get cold and decided to close up my tent. I was hunting with a .243 rifle that had a pink camo cover on it with a strap around so I could hang it off my back. I closed up my blind zippers and put my garbage away in a bucket I had. As I was throwing away my trash, I heard a couple leaves crumble, so I immediately turned my head up to see if it was a deer. After about a minute, I brushed it off as a squirrel or a bird. Disappointed, I closed my blind and headed to my father's. As I was taking my first steps out of my blind, I could see a fresh pathway brush through the leaves. It was a wide path, not from a small animal or even a deer. I immediately started thinking a bear or a wolf, so I started speed walking to where my dad was. I started to panic as it started to get even darker and I was still roughly a mile away. I was just walking as I was stopped in my tracks by one of the most haunting and horrifying noises I'd ever heard. The best way to describe it was a bear/man that was being murdered. It sounded roughly 150 yards back as I started to run. Running with boots and thick hunting gear was hard with 20 pounds on my back, but fear pushed me through and I didn't stop. Around 25 seconds later, I was still running when I heard it again. This time it was louder and closer. At this point, it was completely dark out, with the moon being the only source of light. I turned around with my headlight, and what I saw is still the most terrifying thing I've ever seen. Around 50 yards away, I saw a black figure in the dark, illuminated by the moonlight behind it. It was around 10 feet tall and skinny. Without thinking twice, I started running while trying to get my gun off my back. I didn't know where I was running, but I just ran. I ended up on a road that I recognized as Rabbit Road, the road that connects my camp with the entrance to the hunting area. I ran on the road until I got to my camp. By the time I got into sight of my cabin, I turned around again and saw it again, this time further away. It was still standing up, and I can only describe it as a tall, black, skinny figure. It had long arms and long legs.
Skinny.
As I got on my cabin steps, I threw up from exhaustion and continued to vomit for about a minute, as I later then passed out. I woke up to the sound of my dad's four-wheeler turning into the cabin driveway. I started crying as I ran up to him, hugging him. I quickly told him the story of what happened and how I ran back without stopping. He didn't believe me at first, but as we got settled inside, his face started to change as he saw the desperation in my eyes. I didn't sleep that night, or for weeks after. People have told me it was most likely a bear, or I was just seeing things, but I know what I saw. I'm older now, and I only hunt with someone with me. I also hunt with a bigger gun because it gives me reassurance that I could shoot something larger. As I'm writing this was the most scary experience of my life.
Okay. It was nice. I'll probably give it like a 4 out of 10. Yeah.
It was a Friday evening and I was getting home from school. I was 13 years old and was really excited to go hunting. I love hunting, especially the ranch we go to in Alice, Texas. I've been going there since I was 4, and I have so many memories of the place. It was my grandpa, my dad, and I going. There were going to be a few other people, like the ranch owner's family. We were packed up and ready to go. It was deer season, my favorite season. Just the feeling of seeing a big deer right in front of your eyes is a wonderful feeling, and of course, shooting it. People say that it's wrong to kill animals, but I disagree if you're actually eating it. We got to the ranch and it was
You got
10
a
p.m.,
fun.
so it was pretty dark out there. The ranch is 300 acres, I believe, and the campsite is an old little shack, probably the size of a normal bedroom. There is electricity there, but it's not a huge cabin where most hunters sleep in. However, there are little beds there. But one time my dad found a huge snake shed in one of the beds when I was little. So from then on, we sleep in a tent. The camp is surrounded by woods, with a little field up ahead, probably a little less than the size of a football field. We use that field for dove hunting. Anyhow, we unloaded and chatted for a while around the campfire, telling jokes and whatnot, when we heard this scream. It was the most disturbing thing I'd ever heard. It sounded like a human hybrid or something. The scream sounded not too far away. All of us jumped from our seats and looked at each other. Every man there was freaked out. I could see it in their eyes. The ranch owner was the first one to say, "What the fuck was that?" He then told us and one of his family members to go check it out. He's a pretty old guy in his 70s, so that's why we went to go check it out.
Yeah.
We took my grandpa's ATV and did a quick search around the perimeter, only to find nothing. I was still traumatized. I was even scared to go in the blind by myself. As all hunters know, we have to wake up before dawn and get up into the blind to be unseen by the deer. I went to sleep in the tent with a gun right beside me. I woke up to the alarm and got ready. I was scared of being left alone in the dark, even though it was only an hour or two before dawn breaks. I was still petrified by the scream, and it still echoed in my mind today. My grandpa dropped me off at the blind with his ATV and left. My dad was already in his position. My grandpa's not a soft grandpa. He expects you to know it and do it. Him being him, he just left me in the dark, expecting me to find my way up to the blind myself. So I began climbing up the ladder and began navigating with just my hands. I got into the blind and waited for the sun to peek out. 20 minutes passed and it was still dark out when I noticed something in the middle of the trail. I couldn't see well, so I thought it was the right time to use a night vision sight that my uncle had given me. I was excited, expecting a big deer, but when I put my eye into the sight, what I saw still haunts me today. I don't care if you believe me or not, but I was expecting a deer, only to find a person walking towards the woods. It was distorted looking, but had the same outline of a person. I don't know how it spotted me, but I saw it turn and face towards me. Now the night vision is not super clear, so I couldn't see its face, but I could see it was looking straight at me. Then what I heard next will stick with me for the rest of my life. It gave out the same exact blood-curdling scream as the night before, only louder. At that moment, I cannot describe the fear I felt. The word fear is not enough to describe how I felt. I managed to break free from whatever shock I was in. I managed to grab the .22 and started to fire the entire clip into the path it was standing in. I was still frightened, so I got my rifle and fired all the rounds into the path. When I looked back into the night vision, it was gone. I started to get texts and calls like crazy, mostly from my dad. I told him what happened, and he had heard it too, and so did my grandpa. We still go there to hunt, but it has not been the same peaceful hunt. Now when I hunt, I go with my dad, because I'm scared that thing might come back. I don't know what that thing was, but whatever it was, it survived 25 rounds from a .22 and 4 rounds from a .243. Because when we went to go check, there were no signs of blood or anything, not even footprints. I know it was still dark when I fired all those rounds, but I know for sure at least one of them had to hit whatever that thing was.
That was actually a good one. Yeah, but I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Yeah.
It was the fall of 1986. I was 23 years old. I'd never really been scared in the woods before, honestly. I always felt like the wilderness was my safe place. So
You know, maybe 6 out of 10 is okay. I'll give it 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10.
where I could go and relax and get away from the stresses of life. I've never seen a Bigfoot or skinwalker or any kind of boogeyman in the woods. As a lineman for a small town in West Kentucky, I have seen crazy. Being a small muni, we all had to wear a lot of hats, including utility disconnects. It wasn't fun, but it was part of the job, and there was a lot of crazy, but never in the woods. My only real hobbies were hunting and fishing. Back then, it was easy to find a
Oh,
really
so
good
like
place to
fishing.
hunt just by stopping and asking the landowner for permission. Most were eager to have the deer population thinned out, as they were really destructive, eating young soybean crops. And this was coal country, and back in the 50s, there was a lot of strip mining that left a lot of land unusable for building and farming, so much of it was open for hunting. It was October 1986. Daylight savings time hadn't happened yet, and it was still daylight till just after 7 p.m. I left work at 4 and ran home to change into my camo. It was bow season in Kentucky, my favorite season. I was going to hunt in an area that was special to me. It was in an area we'll call Coon Ridge. This was a very remote area with broken farmland and wooded areas. After parking, I decided not to unload my three-wheeler and just walk the 3/4 of a mile to where I was going to hunt. I was using a Summit climbing stand, so I had to carry my stand and my bow, as well as my fanny pack with my knife and flashlight. I had to walk halfway around the cornfield. The corn had not been cut yet, so I stayed in the lane left by the farmers so that they could get their equipment to the upper end of the field. The field was rectangular, and the upper end was a much higher elevation than the bottom, where I had to cross a creek with shin-deep water to enter the field. At the top of the field, the right-hand corner was where I was going to enter the woods. It was the highest point of the field. I had to pick my way through a thick blackberry thicket, but managed to find a game trail that led me through, and it finally opens into a hillside with large trees. After finding a tree suitable for my climbing stand, getting set up, and a little climb, I was ready to hunt. I love to watch nature. The deer hunting was just an excuse to be in the woods. As a lineman, I had no fear of climbing high, so I would get as high as I could. This time I was up around 20 feet before the canopy started blocking my view. It was around 5:30 when I was settled in my stand and had an arrow nocked. I regularly stayed in my permanent stands late as not to spook deer close by. I had added reflective tape along the trail to mark the way out. This made it easier to find my permanent stands at night. But this day, I was in my climbing stand in an area I hadn't been in at night. I was about to start down when I heard something walking, so I waited. It sounded like a deer in the thicket, but I never really could get a look at it. It was 8 o'clock and close to a full moon that night, so from my high vantage point, I could see pretty good in the woods, and I felt like I could still shoot up to 15 yards, but it was after shooting hours, so I started down. As I did, I could hear the loud crashing of a deer that must have spotted me moving like a sloth down the tree. On the ground, I quickly secured my stand and bow and looked in the direction of the way I came in. I turned on my flashlight. Now, the woods look different at night in the dark, and downright foreign when you turn on your flashlight. It's not bad in a mature woods with no undergrowth, but I was walking into a thicket. I walked along the edge of the thicket for a while, trying to find the trail I came in on, but no luck. It was almost 9 o'clock now, and I was ready to get out, so I just started picking my way through the thicket, keeping the moon on my right shoulder, and finally I came out into the field about 25 yards from where I went in. As I stood there picking the thorns out of my hands and legs, thinking this adventure was over, I surveyed the lane around the field, and in the light of the pale moon, I saw it. Now, when I walked in, I came up the left side of the field around 200 yards to the end, turned right, and walked another 100 yards. And where I was, it was higher on the ground, and I could see around the field where I came in. When I walked in, there was nothing in the trail. I hadn't heard any equipment or ATVs, so I was shocked to see something in the trail. And no small something either. It looked 6 feet wide and 6 feet tall, just standing there about halfway up the field trail. It was the only way out, so I never hesitated. I started walking back to the trail, turned toward whatever it was standing there, hoping it was just a strange shadow, but it wasn't. I grabbed an arrow from the quiver, remembering my knife was in my three-wheeler. I walked fast and never broke stride. 100 yards away, and it didn't move or make a sound. I walked loudly straight towards it for 200 yards, all the while thinking it's really there, in my trail, blocking my only way out. As I got closer, I could make out what it was. It was 2 people standing side by side, and this unnerved me even more. It was 9:15, 40 degrees out here. Nobody should be here. I kept walking, now 20 yards away, and I see that it's a guy and girl, maybe 20 years old. 10 yards away, I'm walking towards them. but no sounds from them. They just stood there. When I got to them, I half expected them to jump me, but they never moved. I said, "Kinda cold out here, ain't it?" No sound. They still never moved. I kept walking. I turned to keep an eye on them. I was thinking, okay, this is it. They never turned around, never even moved their heads. I crossed the creek, and within another 100 yards, I made it back to my truck. I was even more uneasy approaching my truck. It was just so quiet. All I could think of was someone waiting to ambush me. So I kind of eased up on it very quietly and watched it for maybe 3 minutes before approaching it. It seemed fine, so I headed to my truck. As I left, I tried to figure out how they got here because I never saw another vehicle. I tried to just put it behind me. The next day at work, during lunch, I was going to run and get some food, and I noticed all 4 of my tires on my truck were low, and after inspecting them, they all had around 10 to 15 roofing nails in them. I had to put tubes in them to get home. Something odd was going on in those woods. Somebody most certainly did this to my tires while I was parked in them. After this, it always felt like someone was watching me when I was hunting in that area. That's why I stopped going alone, and I never parked off the main gravel road again. I never found out who those 2 young people were, or who.
Damn. Okay. It was nice. I don't know how to rate it actually. I have absolutely no idea how to rate it. Okay. Here we go. Okay, it was nice. It was nice. Okay, so it was nice. Yeah. So can I show you my progress with a scarf? It's pretty long. I still need to make it longer. I think finish this and then yeah. Okay, so let's move to the other video.
Every night, no matter the weather, something walks down our street, whistling softly. You can only hear it if you're in the living room or the kitchen when they walk by, and it always starts at exactly 3:03. The sound is faint at first, somewhere near the beginning of the lane near the Carson place. We're towards the middle of the street, so the whistling moves past us before fading away in the direction of the cul-de-sac. When I was younger, my sister and I would sneak into the kitchen some nights to listen. Mom and Dad didn't like that, and we'd catch hell if they found us out there, but they were never too hard on us, since we always stuck to the one big rule. Don't try to look at whatever was whistling. My neighborhood is a funny place. I've lived here since I was 6, and I love it. The houses are small, but well kept, good-sized yards, and plenty of places to roam. There are a lot of other kids here my age. I turned 13 back in October. We grew up together and would always play foursquare in the cul-de-sac or around from back porch to back porch in the summer. This was a good place to grow up. I'm old enough to see it. And there's only 2 strange things here: the night whistling and the good luck. The whistling never bothered me much. Like I said, I couldn't even hear it from my bedroom. But Mom and Dad don't like talking about it, so I stopped asking questions. My dad is a strong guy, tall and calm. He has an accent since he moved to the US as a kid. His family, my grandparents, they're from the islands. That's what they call it. My dad, the only time he isn't calm is if the whistler comes up. He talks a little quicker then, eyes move faster, and he tells us not to think about it too much and to always remember the one rule. The big rule. Don't try to look outside when the whistler goes past. Not that we could look even if we wanted. See, there are shutters on the inside of every window, thick pieces of heavy canvas that pull down from the top and latch to the bottom of the window frame. Each latch even has a small lock about the size of what you'd find on a diary. My dad locks those shutters every night before we all go to bed and keeps the key in his room. My mom, I don't know what she thinks about the whistling. I've seen her out in the living room before after 3:03. When the sound starts, I could see her if I cracked my door open just an inch to peek. She's not out there often. At least I haven't caught her much. But once or twice a month, I think she sits out there on the big red couch just listening. The whistler has the same tune every night. Remember how I said there are two odd things about where I live? Well, besides our night whistler, everyone in my neighborhood is really lucky. It's hard to explain, and Dad doesn't like us talking about this.
1 second. What happened actually to people who look outside to vote and see him? Or, look outside at him? What happened? Yeah, that's my question.
Part
What's
much
happened?
either. But good things just seem to happen to the people around here a lot.
Okay.
Usually it's small things, winning a radio contest or getting an unexpected promotion at work or finding some arrowheads buried in the yard. The authentic kind. The weather is pretty good, and there's no crime, and everybody's gardens bloom extra bright in the fall. A million little blessings I've heard Mom say about living here. But the main reason we stay here, why we moved back here in the first place, is my sister Nola. She was born very sick, something with her lungs. We couldn't even bring her home when she was born, only visit her in the hospital. She was so small, I remember. Small even compared to the other babies. A machine had to breathe for her. We moved into our house here to be closer to the hospital. As soon as we moved here, Nola started getting better. The doctors couldn't figure it out. They chalked it up to whatever they were doing, but we all could tell they were confused. But my parents knew. Even I knew. Nola getting better was just another of the million little blessings we got for living in our neighborhood. So that's why we stayed, even after we found out that for every small miracle that happens here every day, now and then, some bad things happen. But they only happen if you look for the whistler. See, our neighborhood has a welcoming committee. They show up with macaroni casserole and a gift basket and a manila folder whenever someone new moves in. And they're very friendly. 4 people showed up when we moved in 7 years ago. The committee made small talk, gave me a Snickers bar, and took turns holding Nola. It was her first week out of the hospital, so they were extra careful. Then the committee asked to speak to my parents in private, so I was sent to my room, where I still managed to hear nearly every word. The welcoming committee told my parents about how nice the neighborhood was. Really exceptionally hard to explain kind of nice. And then they told my parents about the even harder to explain whistling that happened every morning at 3:03 and ended at the tick of 3:05. The group, our new neighbors, warned my parents that the whistling was quiet, would never harm or hurt us as long as we didn't look for what was making the sound. This part they stressed, and I pushed my ear into the door, straining to hear them. People who went looking for the whistler had their luck change, sometimes tragically. A black cloud would hang over anyone that looked. Anything that could go wrong would. The manila envelope the committee brought over contained newspaper clippings, stories about car crashes and ruined lives, public deaths and freak accidents. Not everyone dies, I heard the head of the committee tell my dad, but the life goes out of them. Even if they live, there's no light in them ever again. No presence.
What if one guy sees how it looks like, or look for, I don't know if, and then when he sees him, actually kills more people. What then happens? Do they get like? Do they like also change?
My mom, I could tell she wasn't taking it seriously. She kept asking if this was some kind of prank they play on new neighbors. At one point, my mom got angry, accused the committee of trying to scare us out of our new home, asked them if they were racist on the account of my dad being from the islands. My dad calmed her down, told her he could tell our new neighbors were sincere and that they were just trying to help us. He explained that he grew up hearing these kinds of stories from his mom, and that he knew there were strange things that walked among us. Some of these strange things were good, and some were bad, but most were just different. After the committee left, my dad went out to the hardware store, bought the canvas blinds, the latches, and the locks, and installed them on every window in the house after dinner. That first night in our new house, I crept out of my room at 3 a.m., only to find my dad awake, sitting on the living room couch, holding my baby sister. My dad held up his finger in a shush motion, but patted the couch next to him. I sat, and we waited. At exactly 3:03, we heard the whistling. It came and it went, just like our neighbors said. The whistling returns each night, and we never look, and we enjoy our million little blessings every day. Nola breathes on her own, and she grows into a strong, clever girl. My dad even joined the welcoming committee. We don't get new neighbors often. Why would anyone want to leave? But when a new family moves in, my dad and the committee bring them macaroni casserole, a gift basket, and the manila folder. I can always tell by the look on my dad's face when he comes back if the family took the committee seriously or if we'd be getting new neighbors again very soon. Not long ago, the family moved in directly next to us. The previous owner, Miss Maddie, passed away at the age of 105.
Oh,
She lived a good, long life. Our neighbors seemed like they'd fit in just fine. They believed the welcoming committee and took my dad's advice about the locking shutters since they had a young child of their own. Whatever newspaper clippings were in the manila envelope, whatever evidence, my dad never let us see. But I imagine it must have been awfully convincing since our neighbors got along with no issue for the first month. One night, when our new neighbors had to leave town, they sent their son, Holden, to stay with us. He was 12, a year under me in school. I didn't know him well before that night, but as soon as his parents dropped him off after dinner, I could tell it was going to be a bad time. Do you know who was always out there whistling every night?
yeah.
Holden asked me the moment the adults left the room. The three of us were sitting in the den, some Disney movie playing idly on the TV. My sister and I exchanged a glance. We don't talk about it, I said. I think it's that weirdo that lives in the big yellow house in the corner, Holden said.
Mr. Tolls?
My sister asked.
No way. He's really nice.
Holden shrugged. Must be a psycho killer then. Nola tensed. We don't talk about it, I repeated. Let's go in my room and play Nintendo. We spent the next few hours playing games, eating popcorn, and then watching movies. A typical sleepover, but I could see Holden was getting antsy. After my parents had wished us a good night, locked the blinds, and gone to bed, Holden stood up from his beanbag and walked over to where Nola and I were sitting on my bed. Have you ever even tried looking? He asked. It's nearly time. Like most sleepovers, we'd conveniently ignored any suggestion of a bedtime. I was shocked to see he was right. It was almost 3 a.m. I sighed. We don't... See, I can't. I can't even try to look because my dad locks the blinds every night and hides the key. He continued, ignoring me.
So does our dad.
Nola said. No, replied Holden. No, he doesn't. You saw him do it, I said, a little sharper than I meant to sound. Holden grinned. Your dad locks the blinds, yeah, but he doesn't hide the key. He keeps it right on his keychain. So? I asked, worried I already knew what he would say next. Because I had noticed that my dad didn't bother hiding the key anymore after all these years, because he knew we took it seriously. So, after your dad locked up, but before your parents went to bed, I went to the bathroom. And on my way, I may have peeked into their room, and I may have seen your dad's keychain on his nightstand. And I maybe went and borrowed the key to the blinds.
Yo.
Nola and I stared, and his grin only grew wider. You're lying, I said. Holden shrugged. You can check if you want. Just open your parents' door and look. You'll see his keychain right there on the nightstand. Stay here, I told both of them. Don't move a muscle. I hurried over to my parents' room, but hesitated at the door. If Holden wasn't lying, my dad would be angry. Beyond angry. I was scared thinking about it, but more scared of an open window with the Whistler right outside. I opened the door, barely an inch, and looked in, but it was too dark to see. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the room. 2 steps into the dark, and I froze. The whistling started, and I could hear it clearly, from my parents' room. I never realized, but they must have heard the sound every night since we moved into the house. They never told us. I don't think I could have slept through it. I stood there, listening to the whistling come closer,
Hopefully with
unsure
Mama.
whether I should turn on the lights or call out for my dad. Soft sounds from the living room brought me back to reality. Nola! I yelled, running out of my parents' room. Holden and Nola were standing near the front door next to the window. Holden wasn't lying. I could see him fumbling with the lock on one of the blinds. I heard a click. He did have the key. Holden let out a quick laugh.
Mom.
Nola stood next to him, hunched up, afraid but maybe curious. The whistling was right outside of our house now. I think I made a sound, called out. I can't remember. Time felt frozen, the clock hands nailed to the face. But I found myself moving. I'm not fast. I've never been athletic. Somehow, though, I covered the space between myself and Nola in a moment. My eyes were locked on her, but I heard Holden pull the blind all the way down so it could release. I heard the snap of it start to raise, and I heard the whistling just on the other side of the window, but I had my arms around Nola, and I turned so she was facing away from the window. At the same time, I jammed my eyes shut, and the blinds whipped open. The whistling stopped. I felt Nola shaking in my arms. Don't look, okay? I told her. Don't turn around. We were positioned so that she was facing back towards the hallway, and I was facing the window. My eyes were still closed, and I felt her nod into my shoulder. I reached out with the arm not holding Nola to try to touch Holden. My hand brushed against his arm. He was shaking worse than Nola. Holden? I asked. Silence. I reached past him and gingerly felt for the window, eyes still sealed shut. The glass was cold against my fingertips, colder than it should have been for the time of the year. I moved my hand up the window, searching for the string to the blind. The glass began to get warmer, and the further I reached, there was a gentle hum feeding back into my fingertips. I tried not to think about what might be on the other side of the window. Finally, I touched the string and yanked the blind shut. I opened my eyes. In the dim light leaking out from the kitchen, I could make out Holden, pale and small, staring at the now closed window. Holden? I asked again. He turned towards me and he screamed. Everything became a flurry of emotion. Lights sparked to life in the hallway, then the living room. My parents' footsteps thudded across the hardwood floor. I didn't turn to look back at them. My eyes were glued to Holden. He was pale, had bit his lip so hard that there was a thin red line of blood running down his chin, and he'd wet himself. What happened? My dad asked from behind me. I managed to swivel away from Holden and look back. He looked. I'd never seen my dad scared before, but I saw it that night, in that moment. An old, ugly tear stitched on his face. A parent's fear. Just Holden? He mouthed to me. I nodded yes. My dad let out a sigh. He looked so relieved I nearly expected him to cheer. But then he turned to Holden, and my dad's face changed. I wondered if he felt bad for feeling good that Holden was the only one that looked. There was a knock at the door. We all froze. Holden whimpered.
Don't answer it.
My mom said. She stood at the threshold of the hall. I always thought she was a skeptic and just humored my dad about the window and the Whistler, but that night, we were all believers. I noticed that both my parents held baseball bats they must have taken from their bedroom. The knock came again, a little louder this time. Please don't open the door, Holden whispered. My dad walked over to him and hugged him close. We won't, my dad promised, still holding his bat. Nothing is coming in here tonight. This time the knocking was loud enough to rattle the door. Holden screamed again, and Nola clutched her arms around my neck. My mom came over and knelt down next to us, wrapping my sister and me close.
Call the police.
My mom whispered to my dad. The knocking instantly stopped. My dad looked over his shoulder at us. Do you think... He was cut off by frantic knocking that trailed off to a polite...
Call the police.
Something said from the other side of the door. The voice from outside sounded exactly like my mom, like a parrot repeating the words back to her.
Call the police.
My mom pulled us closer.
Call the police. Please stop.
I heard her whisper to herself. I don't think calling them will help, my dad said. How will we know when they're the ones at the door? The knocking came back harder than before. The door shook, then it stopped. After a long moment, I heard the knocking again, but it was coming from our back door. We all turned around towards the back door, but the knocking immediately returned to the front door. Front to back, back to front. Loud, then quiet, then loud again. Suddenly the sound was coming from both doors at once. Big, heavy blows like a sledgehammer. Then something started rapping against all the windows in the house, and then the walls. It was like we were living inside a drum with a dozen people trying to play it at once. Or we were a turtle and something was attempting to claw us out of our shell. Stop! Holden yelled. The knocking died. I won't tell, Holden said, staring at the door. I promise I won't tell anyone what I saw. Just please go away. We waited for nearly a minute, and then we heard it. A soft tap coming from the window Holden had looked through earlier. Holden started to cry, sobbing like a prisoner watching gallows being built outside their cell. My dad held him, brushing his hair, but never lied to him, never told him things would be okay. The tapping at the window went on for the rest of the night. We huddled together in the living room for I don't know how long. Eventually, my mom tried to take us kids into my room while my dad stayed to watch the door. But the second we moved into my bedroom, the knocking came back, so loud it was impossible to ignore. I was afraid the door couldn't take it. We went back into the living room and the knocking stopped. Only the tap on the window remained. None of us slept that night. The tapping stopped at around 7 a.m. That's about the time the sun comes up. We waited for another 2 hours before my dad opened the blinds from one window. He made us all go back to my parents' bedroom. I heard him open the door and then come back in. Okay, he told us. It's done. Holden's parents came back around lunchtime. My mom and dad walked Holden over to his house and they all went inside for quite a while. Nola and I watched from the window. She stuck to me the whole day, right at my side, sometimes holding my hand. When my parents came back, they looked grim, but wouldn't tell us what they said to Holden's family. It was a Sunday, so we all spent the day together, ordered pizza, and watched movies. That night, everyone slept in my room. Noel and my mom in the bed with me, my dad in the chair he'd pulled over. There was no knocking that night, or any night since. We didn't see much of Holden or his parents for the rest of that week, but by Tuesday, there was a moving truck in their driveway. Nola and I watched them packing up the whole afternoon after school. What sticks with me most is how tired Holden and his parents looked. All three had the same pallor, grim mouths, and lightless eyes. Even from across the street, I could tell something was very wrong. Holden and his family were gone before sunset. I remember what the original welcoming committee said to my parents when we moved in. Not everyone who looks at the Whistler dies, but even those that live have the light go out of them, and the rest of their lives are full of misfortune. A million little tragedies. I think Holden's parents must have looked, either to comfort him if they didn't believe, or share the burden if they did. I watch Nola some days, happy and young and alive, and I wonder if I'd been slower, if she'd looked out the window that night. Would I have looked too, to comfort her, to share that burden? I'm glad I don't have to find out. It's been 2 months since the night Holden stayed here. We still live in that house, in that neighborhood. We still hear our Whistler walking past every night. The blessings, the luck, the good things here are too good to leave, but we're careful. We don't have friends over to spend the night anymore, and my dad hides the key to the blinds very, very well. Not that I've gone looking. Some things you just don't need to look for.
What was a good one? Holy shit. What was a good one? The Dogs Somnium. Yeah, also the last video that we watched before was by Mr. Nightmare. So now I think I'm gonna end stream. So goodbye everyone, thank you for watching, appreciate it, and I'll see you again next time.